What if the most iconic feature of American cars was born not from a designer's pen, but from the wing of a fighter plane? Welcome to Winds of Thought. Today, we are re-embarking on a deep dive into one of the most visually explosive and financially reckless chapters in automotive history, the Great Tailfin War of the late 1950s. This isn't just a story about cars, it's a story about corporate ego, jet-age dreams, and a billion-dollar battle for the soul of the American driveway. But to truly understand this colossal clash of chrome and steel, we first need to rewind the clock to a world engulfed in conflict. The year is 1941. While war rages in Europe, America's industrial might is just beginning to stir. But this awakening isn't for producing the next family sedan. The attack on Pearl Harbor changes everything in an instant. The nation's entire industrial complex, including its legendary automotive giants, is commandeered for the war effort. Factories that once hummed with the assembly of Chevrolets and Fords are now churning out tanks, bomber engines, and Jeeps. Civilian car production doesn't just slow down, it grinds to a complete and utter halt. The very last passenger car for the public rolls off the assembly line in February of 1942. Now, imagine you're an average American family in this era. You were used to a certain rhythm of life, which included the possibility of buying a new car every few years. Suddenly, that option vanishes for the duration of the war. For 4 long years, there are no new models, no new technologies, no new colors. The public's desire for something new, something modern, is being pent up, building like pressure behind a dam. So, when the war finally ends in 1945, you can bet that this tidal wave of demand is ready to crash onto the shores of Detroit. Everyone expected the automakers to unleash a new generation of futuristic jet-age automobiles that would make up for lost time, but that's not what happened, not even close. Why? Because America may have won the war, but its factories were facing a new enemy, a crippling shortage of raw materials, predominantly steel. Car manufacturers simply didn't have the resources to design and build brand new models from the ground up. Look at the Chevrolet, for example. The 1942 model was a handsome, well-proportioned car. Then, in 1946, right after the war, what did Chevrolet offer? It was essentially the exact same 1942 car, but often even more bare bones. The shiny chrome bumpers were now just painted steel. Some manufacturers, in a desperate move, even resorted to using wood for body panels to conserve metal. It was a frustrating and underwhelming period for a public that had been promised a bright, shiny future. This period of post-war stagnation, however, was the necessary calm before the storm. The stage was perfectly set for a design revolution, a spark that would ignite an all-out war. That spark finally came in 1948 from an unlikely leader, Cadillac. Their new models introduced what was known as pontoon styling, which smoothed out the body by integrating the fenders and eliminating running boards. But the real masterstroke, the one that would change car design for a decade, was hidden on the rear. Inspired by the sleek twin-tilled Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighter plane, Cadillac's designers added small, subtle fins. It was a quiet, almost subconscious nod to the speed and power of the jet age. It was the moment an airplane's wing gave a car its wings. For the next several years, Cadillac quietly owned this new aesthetic. Their fins were a signature, a mark of exclusive luxury. But in the mid-1950s, a sleeping giant in the industry was about to wake up with a vengeance. That giant was Chrysler. Now Chrysler had built a solid reputation for engineering cars that were durable, high quality, and incredibly reliable. But they also had a reputation for being profoundly soul-crushingly boring to look at. A common phrase tossed around at the time was that Chrysler cars were designed by engineers, not designers. They were boxes on wheels, and their conservative image from the 1930s still haunted them. They knew they had to change, and change dramatically. So, they made a power move. They hired a visionary designer named Virgil Exner away from Studebaker and gave him a single mission: make Chrysler the style leader. This new design movement was called the Forward Look, and its motto was simple: make cars longer, wider, and lower. The transformation that followed was nothing short of breathtaking. In just 3 years, Chrysler's lineup went from tall and boxy to long, low, and aggressive. It was one of the most rapid and radical transformations in automotive history, and a huge part of this new, aggressive identity was the tailfin. Chrysler looked at what Cadillac had done and decided to take that idea and amplify it, to make it their own. Cadillac had planted a small seed, but Chrysler was about to cultivate a whole forest. The peak of Chrysler's offensive arrived in 1957. Models like the Plymouth Fury and the Chrysler 300 became rolling sculptures of steel and glass. They featured aggressively slanted grilles, fake dual headlights, a dramatically low roofline, and those magnificent soaring tailfins that were now larger and more pronounced than anything Cadillac had. Chrysler's marketing was genius. Showrooms had huge signs that proclaimed, "Suddenly, it's 1960. They weren't just selling a car, they were selling a purchasable piece of the future. The public responded in droves, flocking to dealerships on Sundays just to gaze at these automotive wonders. For the first time ever, Chrysler was the undisputed king of cool. the style leader, and its main competitors, General Motors and Ford, were caught completely off guard. Now, General Motors and Ford had to respond, and fast. The year 1958 was the year of the counterattack, but it was a messy one. Ford's response was surprisingly muted. They seemed largely unimpressed by the whole Tailfin craze. Their 1958 models featured more straight lines or small, almost apologetic fins, but nothing that could truly compete with Chrysler's flamboyance. General Motors, however, swung for the fences, but in the wrong direction. GM seemed to think the future wasn't about fins, but about chrome. So much chrome. The 1958 Buick, Oldsmobile, and especially the Cadillac, were draped in acres of shiny, polished metal. They looked less like cars and more like rolling jewelry boxes, and it was widely seen as a bizarre misstep. Chrysler, meanwhile, was able to rest on its well-earned laurels, making only minor updates to its winning 1957 formula. But this calm was deceptive. The most dramatic phase of the war was still to come, the year 1959. This was the year the Tailfin War reached its literal and figurative peak. Daddy GM finally woke up. They completely redesigned their entire lineup, ditching the excessive chrome for clean, sharp lines and the most massive, audacious tailfins the world had ever seen. Cadillac, in particular, struck back with a vengeance. The 1959 Cadillac featured tailfins that were no longer just stylistic cues. They were monumental sculptures, towering 22 centimeters high, capped with dual-bullet taillights. The car looked less like an automobile and more like a rocket ship parked in your driveway. It became the instant, classic symbol of 1950s Americana, an icon of excess and optimism. This was the absolute zenith. But in the world of design, what goes up must come down, and the tailfin's fall from grace was as rapid as its rise. By 1960, the trend was already in full retreat. Why did this golden age of outrageous design come to a crashing halt? There were 4 key reasons. First, the cost. These complex fins were incredibly expensive to design, stamp, and assemble. Second, the public and the automotive press simply grew tired of the excess. The initial wow factor had worn off. Third, and very practically, they created massive blind spots, making parking a hazardous guessing game. And fourth, there were genuine safety concerns. The combination of a sharp, pointed fin and a toddler on a sidewalk was a lawsuit waiting to happen. So, the fins began to disappear. Some manufacturers, like Plymouth, chopped them off abruptly between the 1960 and 1961 model years. For Cadillac, the fins slowly and gracefully shrank, year after year, becoming a subtle ridge until they had vanished completely by 1965. The era of outrageous styling was over, replaced by a new era of understated, boxy designs. It was a brief, brilliant, and utterly unique burst of creativity. A golden age where cars were more than just transportation. They were dreams, aspirations, and rolling statements of national confidence. They were rocket ships on wheels, a testament to a time when designers dared to dream big, even if they eventually flew too close to the sun. If you enjoyed this journey into the most flamboyant chapter of automotive history, do the one thing that helps Winds of Thought more than anything: hit the like button.